Hi, welcome to the 32 in 32 Fantasy Football Waiver Wire show for Week 10. I am David Cruz. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being here. Let's get right into some things that happened in Week 9. We are at the midpoint after tonight's game of the NFL season. 136 games down, 136 games to go. It's been a really strange season, and this week was no exception. You had New Orleans losing to Atlanta at home after making a big comeback. Dallas lost at home to Denver in a game that was nowhere near as close as the final score would indicate. Jacksonville beat Buffalo. That was something almost probably nobody had. I think that took down a lot of survivors this past week. You had a really ugly game in Miami between the Texans and the Dolphins. It was a brutal game to watch. I watched the condensed version of the game. There were 9 sacks and 9 turnovers between the two teams and a total of 26 points. Both lines look pretty bad. And Miami had a couple more injuries this week. So it's not looking good for either one of those teams, even though the Dolphins came out with the win. On the plus side, Christian McCaffrey was back and played this week. I'd rather have seen him sit another week, although he doesn't really look like he needed it. I watched also that game, and he looked pretty good. It was limited compared to what we're used to seeing from him, but he had 106 yards from scrimmage, and he was running strong. So hopefully, they've got 3 games left till their bye. So hopefully by the time we get to the bye week, he's still healthy and he looks fully healthy and as engaged as he has been in the past. He would give a big boost to a lot of owners. For the Monday night game tonight, it is the Bears versus the Steelers in Pittsburgh. The weather looks good for this game. It's going to be in the mid to high 50s during the game and with a low wind. Both offenses are kind of come and go. The over-under on this game is 39 points. The question is, do these teams combined crack 40 points? David Montgomery appears like he's going to be back and play tonight, which is good news. I wouldn't be surprised to see him have a reduced role in his first game back until he gets more into game shape, and they do have their bye next week. Hurts Khalil Herbert's value, certainly. Darnell Mooney going into the game has a groin injury, and he's questionable, so keep an eye on the actives and inactives that come out 90 minutes before game time. And for the Steelers, who helps Najee carry this team? Najee Harris has been easily the rookie running back one. He'll be a first rounder next year, and he does get a lot of touches for that offense. Will they have to throw a lot? Hopefully. I've got Deontay Johnson in a lot of leagues that I'm still contending in. I could use a big night from him. Let's look at some of the new injuries that happened this week. In the Thursday night game, the Jets quarterback Mike White injured his arm, had to leave the game, did not return, and he reportedly couldn't even grip a football. The injury was so bad. Keep an eye on that. I'm starting to see rumblings that Zach Wilson's getting closer to being healthy. But if White and Wilson aren't able to go, it looks like it's going to be another Josh Johnson week. For the Jets, safety Marcus May tore his Achilles. He's done for the year. That's a terrible injury. I know Marcus May has come and gone, but that's just not good news. And tight end Tyler Kroft suffered a chest injury. Keep an eye on that. He left the game. He didn't return. He is their number 1 tight end. For Indianapolis, right tackle Braden Smith suffered triceps injury, didn't come back. I say constantly, I hate to see injuries to the offensive line because it's a key part of the offense. And cornerback Xavier Rhodes hurt a calf, didn't return. He's not the X-Man of old, but he's still a key member of their defensive backfield. For the upcoming game Thursday night, Baltimore at Miami. New injury for Baltimore. Safety Deshaun Ellis suffered a pec, toral, and a bicep injury. They're scared he's done for the year. On the Miami side of the ball, a line that has been reeling, lost center Greg Manx to an ankle injury, and he didn't return to the game. Their line is already decimated. They can't afford too many injuries, so keep an eye on the injury report. And tight end Durham Smythe suffered an eye injury in that game. I'm not sure he didn't return, but keep an eye on the injuries reports for there. For the Giants, running back Devontae Booker suffered a hip injury late in that game, did not return. They're on a bye this week, and hopefully they're able to get Saquon Barkley back after the bye, but still keep an eye on the Booker injury. Tight end Caden Smith suffered a concussion. Not a key tight end, but they use him in a lot of 12 sets, and he's a good blocker. For the Raiders, Las Vegas cornerback Kayshawn Nixon suffered an ankle injury, and linebacker Nick Kwiatkowski also suffered an ankle injury. That's a tough turf there at Giants Stadium. Those are key members of their defense, and it's a defense that's been better than people expected. So don't want to lose too many guys on that side of the ball for the Raiders. For Cleveland, Greedy Williams suffered a shoulder injury, which was an injury to the same shoulder that's been bothering him for the last few weeks. So don't be surprised if he's going to miss some time. Cincinnati safety Brandon Wilson suffered a knee injury, and linebacker Akeem Davis Gaither also suffered either a knee or a foot injury. I saw conflicting reports there. Denver lost the right side of their offensive line during the game in Dallas. It was kind of a costly win for them. Bobby Massey suffered an ankle injury, the right tackle, and right guard Graham Glasson suffered an ankle injury that they put into an air cast. They were already without their left tackle, so that's 3/5 of their line. That's just not good. Keep an eye on those injuries. Hopefully those guys are able to get back sooner rather than later. For Dallas, running back Ezekiel Elliott suffered a knee bruise. It's the same knee that's been bothering him off and on all season. So keep an eye on the injury reports for Zeke. He did come back and play, and I think he'll probably try to play through it if he can. Okay, we are not even close to being done with injuries. A couple more to report for Denver. Cornerback Patrick Surtain suffered a knee injury, and tight end Albert Ogwekemam suffered a knee injury. I always butcher that name. For Houston, running back Scotty Phillips suffered a leg injury. He's not a huge fantasy impact, but he is part of their running back rotation. Thankfully for them, they have a bye this week. Atlanta cornerback Kendall Sheffield suffered a hamstring injury. Soft tissue injury, not a good thing. New Orleans strong safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson hurt his leg and his foot and had to come out of the game. For New England, they suffered a slew of head injuries. Running backs Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris both had to come out with head injuries. Damian Harris's was pretty late. Keep an eye on those. Special teams returner Gunnar Olszewski. I saw that injury. That was not a good one. I would not be surprised if he misses time. Although I thought Daniel Jones concussion was a guaranteed week or two out, and he was able to come back. So keep an eye on those. Tight end Jonnu Smith also suffered a shoulder injury. The two tight ends there have been a pretty important part of the offense. Haven't popped big in fantasy, but keep an eye on the New England injury report this week. Carolina left defensive end Brian Burns suffered an ankle injury on a dirty play by Mac Jones, quarterback for New England. He basically kicked his legs out while he was on the ground, and Burns was trying to go after a fumble. I'm sure if you haven't seen it yet, look for it on any social media platform. The play is all over the place. Also, center Matt Paredes, the second team center who had been replacing the starting center, tore his ACL. He's done for the year. They may be down to their third string center come this week. And left tackle Cameron Irving suffered a calf injury. So that's 2/5 of their offensive line. Hopefully Irving's back sooner than later. For Buffalo, in the loss to the Jaguars, left cornerback Taron Johnson suffered a concussion. So did running back Zach Moss. Both guys didn't return to the game. Keep an eye on the Moss injury. It's obvious that the running game isn't a huge part of Buffalo's offense. In a 9-6 game, they only ran the ball 14 times, and 5 of those were by Josh Allen. But Moss is still a nice piece on fantasy teams. Also, free safety Jaquan Johnson suffered a hamstring injury. For Jacksonville, they lost cornerback Chris Claybrooks to a concussion. And left tackle Cam Robinson ended up being a late scratch to that game. His back flared up on him. For Minnesota, cornerback Rashad Breeland suffered a groin injury. Philadelphia, left cornerback Darius Slay suffered a hamstring injury. That's a huge part of their defensive backfield. Also, right cornerback Avonte Maddox suffered a knee injury. For Green Bay, they lost cornerback Eric Stokes to a knee injury, nose tackle Kenny Clark to a back injury, and left guard John Runyon, who had already been sick, had to come out of the game about midway through. He was just too sick to continue. Hopefully that's a short absence. For Kansas City, right tackle Lucas Niang suffered a rib injury. He was already a replacement for Mike Remmers. So keep an eye on their injury report for those guys. They played their third string right tackle yesterday. Big one in Arizona. Running back Chase Edmonds suffered what is being reported as a high ankle sprain, and a trip to short-term IR has not been ruled out for him. Of course, that's going to be more usage for James Conner, but keep an eye also on running back Eno Benjamin, who had a role yesterday and scored a touchdown. Also lost left guard Justin Pugh to a calf injury. And San Francisco right tackle Matt McGlinchey suffered a knee injury and did not return. Let's talk about bye weeks coming up. For week 10, there's 4 teams on a bye. Chicago is going to be missing David Montgomery or Khalil Herbert, Allen Robinson, who hopefully not too many of you are depending on at this point, and Darnell Mooney will be out. More important is Cincinnati. A lot of people have Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Jamar Chase. So that's going to be a big hurt. For Houston, Brandon Cooks, maybe Nico Collins. I know I have him on some of my deep dive rosters. For the Giants, Daniel Jones will be out. Saquon Barkley, Sterling Shepard, Kenny Golladay, and Kadarius Toney will be the guys missed the most. So you'll be looking for replacements for all those guys. Okay, and weeks 11 and 12 are both 2-team bye weeks, but they're kind of important teams to fantasy owners. The Broncos and the Rams will be off in week 11, and the Cardinals and the Chiefs will be off in week 12. There will be a lot of replacements needed. Start planning for those now. Even defenses and kickers are important for those teams. Okay, let's look at some of the week 9 stars that are probably widely available on waiver wires. Most of them I probably won't want, but it's important to point them out. For the Jets, Josh Johnson had a big garbage time game in a game that got away from the Jets pretty early. He relieved Mike White when he injured his arm and had 317 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. He had a late interception. He also had 4 carries for 18 yards, which was a nice week. I think he was probably the big free agent quarterback available. Matt Ryan's still available in about 45% of leagues. I'm not crazy about Matt Ryan overall in a 1-quarterback league. He's got a good ceiling, and he looked certainly vintage yesterday. It was a nice performance. But to me, he's got too low of a floor. And even though he had a rushing touchdown yesterday, he does not usually run the ball a lot. For running backs, Nyheim Hines finally rewarded his owners. If you've been plugging him into lineups, though, you've probably been frustrated most weeks. He did have 20.8 PPR points this week, and he's still available in about 47% of leagues. But to me, the floor is too low on Nyheim Hines. He had 14.7 PPR points the previous 6 weeks combined. I know he was running back 15 last year, but the floor is just too low for me to rely on him. For Baltimore, fullback Patrick Ricard registered 5 targets, 3 catches, 35 yards, and a touchdown. I just got one word: no, don't. You're not going to get that performance out of him enough to make a difference for your teams. He's mostly a blocker. He doesn't run the ball too often, and he's used occasionally in the passing game. Ramondre Stevenson had a nice performance. I'd probably recommend him if he didn't suffer an injury late in the game and have to come out. Keep an eye on that. You may want to consider adding him. He did have 10 carries for 62 yards, 2 targets, 2 receptions, 44 yards. Nice 40-yard completion. He looked like he was running really hard. He wants to make it hard for them to deactivate him again. So keep an eye on the injury. He may be an ad for you. For Atlanta, the wide receivers we're going to talk about now. Olamide Zaccheaus had 3 targets, 3 receptions, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He was Matt Ryan's guy yesterday. Unfortunately, he's not Matt Ryan's guy too often. The 3 targets to me is a red flag. He doesn't usually get a ton more than that. And the 2 touchdowns is nice, but I don't think you can count on that with that volume. For Dallas, Malik Turner had 7 targets, 5 catches for 33 yards, and he had the 2 garbage time touchdowns. Malik Turner's mostly a special teams guy. He was in there when the game was gone, when it was out of hand. Don't expect a repeat performance anytime soon. For Cleveland, Donovan Peoples-Jones turned in 3 targets, 2 catches for 86 yards and a touchdown, a 60-yard touchdown, by the way. To me, there's just not enough volume in anything but the deepest leagues where you're kind of hoping for a long touchdown. For the Jets, Keelan Cole had 8 targets, 5 receptions, 66 yards. He didn't score, but he was a nice plug and play. I used him in a couple of places last week. Corey Davis was out of the game. There's another guy I like on the Jets better that should be seeing a role increase. For tight ends, for the Chargers, 2. Steven Anderson had 4 targets, 4 catches, 39 yards, and the tight end king a touchdown. And Donald Parham Jr. had 3 targets, caught all 3 of them for 39 yards and a touchdown. No. Each of those guys has like 12 targets each on the year. If you want a Chargers tight end, Jared Cook's the guy. He's still, had his share in that game. Those are 2 and 3. They're way down on the normal pecking order. And for the second week in a row, Jeff Swaim cashed in 4 targets for 4 receptions, 29 yards, and a touchdown. Another guy that the volume isn't there for me. He's got 21 targets on the year. I'm not going to tell you no, but I'm certainly not going to be the one that tells you yes, you should pick him up. Let's look at some guys I think you should pick up this week. If you're streaming for Joe Burrow or Daniel Jones, I am in favor of picking up Ben Roethlisberger, who's pretty widely available still, and plugging him in. They're playing the Lions this week. The Lions have a decent front 7, but their defensive backfield isn't anything to write home about. They may actually be a little tough on Najee Harris and force Ben to throw the ball some. So I'm expecting a decent game out of Ben Roethlisberger. For running backs, I give up. The ghost of Jordan Howard visited us again yesterday. And in 2 games, since Miles Sanders has been on IR, they've kind of gone away entirely from Kenneth Gainwell, and even to a respect, Boston Scott yesterday. In a game, they only threw 17 times and ran, I think, 29 or 30 times. Jordan Howard has, in the last 2 weeks, he's got 29 carries for 128 yards and 3 touchdowns. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore that production, and you got to hope it continues until Sanders gets back. Their bye isn't until week 14, I believe. So there's certainly some opportunities there. I certainly am going to be looking to add him in some of my leagues, especially in a non-PPR league. I think you have to add him. For Baltimore, Devontae Freeman has picked up the pace lately. In his last 3 games, he's had 26 carries for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's also had 8 targets for and caught 5 of them for 49 yards and a touchdown. So that's 40.5 points over the last 3 weeks. If Murray continues to be out, I got to think Freeman's going to be the guy over Le'Veon Bell. If you need a plug and play in the next couple of weeks, Devontae Freeman, someone to consider. For the Jets, I've mentioned Ty Johnson a number of times on this show. He doesn't touch the ball a ton, but in the last 4 weeks, he's had 56.2 PPR points, 17 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown, and 19 targets, 15 receptions, 198 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's been great for me in best ball, and I certainly would love to add him in a PPR league. Most of my PPR leagues, he's already gone. And another returning former stud is Mark Ingram of the Saints. Since he's been with the Saints, he's looked pretty much like Saints Mark Ingram. Yesterday, he had 9 carries for 43 yards. He also had 5 targets that he caught all of them and had an additional 21 yards. It's 11.4 PPR points. Not a bad pinch hit flex play there. I got to think he's going to spell Kamara quite a bit, not like more than 30 to 35%, but there's still some production to be had there. They run the ball a ton. Okay, let's look at some wide receivers. The first one for the Jets, I mentioned Keelan Cole earlier. I prefer Elijah Moore a little bit more. I think he's got a higher ceiling. Last 2 games, he's had 14 targets. He's caught 13 of them for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. The danger is Zach Wilson comes back, and, I think Mike White and even Josh Johnson at this point of the career are better quarterbacks than Zach Wilson. But Elijah Moore is a talented guy. He also does returns. So if you can get points in the return game, that's a bonus. Brandon Ayuk has been getting dropped a lot. And if somebody in your league drops him, try to get him this week. He's available in almost 40% of leagues right now. Last couple of weeks, he's looked more like the Brandon Ayuk from 2020. And he manned up yesterday. He made a couple of really tough contested catches. He did fumble the ball once on a tough punch out, but Brandon Ayuk's looking a lot more like he did last year. A guy that's available in almost 75% of leagues, and I'm kicking myself because I had to let him go in a couple of leagues yesterday for a pinch hitter. I just needed somebody. But Denver, Tim Patrick had a pretty good game yesterday. Like I've said before, that's a guy that's got a nose for the end zone. He's not going to give you a 10-catch, 150-yard game, but he'll give you a touchdown quite a bit. And between 4 and 5 catches, you tack on 40 to 50 yards. That's a pretty good day. Tim Patrick absolutely deserves to be on more rosters. And finally, a guy I had kind of closed the book on, but has shown signs of life lately. He's the last guy I'd look at out of these 4. But for the Falcons, Russell Gage, Two of the last three games has had 16.7 points, and yesterday he had 13.4. Unfortunately, that third game was a goose egg. He didn't even have a target. But they've got Dallas this week, and it's quite possible that they are going to have to air it out. And Russell Gage is certainly at least a wide receiver two in that offense. Cordell Patterson is the guy, but he's a hybrid. So take a look at Russell Gage if you're diving deep and you need a pinch hitter the next 2 or 3 weeks. The tight ends are pretty much reruns. Dan Arnold had 4 more catches for 60 yards yesterday. He also had 7 targets, and in the last 2 games, he's had 17 targets with 12 catches and 128 yards. Hasn't gotten into the end zone. I kind of expect he will. That's where his value's been in the past. But if you need a pinch hit tight end this week, certainly Dan Arnold's a guy to consider. I started him in about 5 of my leagues yesterday, and I was very pleasantly pleased. Tyler Conklin for the Vikings. They've got the Chargers this week. In his last 3 games, he's had 19 targets, 13 catches for 173 yards. That's good value. That's about 10 points on average, and he didn't need a touchdown to get there. So he is a actual viable target in that offense. And a guy to keep an eye on for the rest of the season is Evan Ingram of the Giants. Daniel Jones does like him, and he has cashed in a couple of touchdowns the last couple of weeks. He hasn't been as targeted as much in the past, but they only threw the ball yesterday 20 times. He's still at a 15% target share. Finally, look at kicking streamer for the week. I would be looking to stream the kicker for Indianapolis this week, whether it's Rodrigo Blankenship returning or Michael Badgley, who's been kicking while Blankenship's out. They've got the Jaguars at home. I think that's got a very good chance to be a high-scoring game for the Colts. They've been putting up points very regularly lately. For defenses, a couple of candidates. Denver has Philadelphia at home. If Denver shows up like they did yesterday in Dallas, I would be starting them most of the time. And I think Philly's a good candidate to get some numbers, some sacks or turnovers. And Tennessee's still available pretty widely. They looked great last night against the Rams, and they've got New Orleans coming into their building this week. New Orleans, you don't know what you're going to get with New Orleans. They put up a lot of points when they needed them late, but Atlanta was able to hold them down until the last 10 minutes of the game in their building. So Tennessee is another team I would consider streaming. I actually hit last week with my Houston pick. Also said I like the Dolphins in that game, but I like Houston a little bit better. Depending on your scoring, it was pretty much hand in hand. And to show you what a bizarre fantasy week it was, also Jacksonville had a great game against Buffalo, of all teams. I don't know anybody that would have recommended Jacksonville except as a deep contrarian play. That's pretty much going to do it for this week. A couple of things I'd like to say before we go. Please consider supporting Movember this month. A whole bunch of the fantasy football analysts on Twitter have created a site on the Movember site. Look for hashtag FF Twitter. That's our team. We're trying to raise $5,000 this month. If you've got some time, consider donating a couple of bucks if you can. Next week, I'm going to take a look at my teams. I've mentioned several times that I have over 20 teams. We're going to see how I'm doing because I do like to hold my feet to the fire. That's pretty much going to do it. Follow us at 32 in 32 Fantasy Football. That's at 32IN32FF on Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like our videos if you get a chance. That would be wonderful. My handle is in the window. Please feel free to follow me, ask me any questions on YouTube. That'll do it. Have a great week. Be kind, be respectful, and we will see you next week.